You are, of course, in the Design and Innovation building. This building is dedicated to two purposes, really. The first is to create the innovation workforce of the future, and the second is to create and build new companies. So those are really the two things that we do in this building. On the first floor, we have a whole bunch of entrepreneurial educational programs, workshops, seminars, all sorts of stuff. Anybody and everybody is very welcome to attend any of those. They're all on the innovation.ucsd website. There's no cost for any of this, right? So you can just come to whatever interests you. We have prototype labs and assembly labs, maker spaces and everything on the second floor, so you can make whatever you want. There is really nothing you can't make in this building. We have the design lab on the third floor, which is multidisciplinary teams of researchers solving really big societal problems like immigration, climate change, etc. And then on the top floor, we have the Entrepreneurship Center, which is the incubator for companies. So if you survive the first 3 floors and you actually get to make a company, you end up on the top floor. There's 27 companies up there currently across just about every sector. The only thing we don't have here is wet labs, but Julio, where's Julio? Yeah, way over there. Julio manages Wet Lab Accelerator, which he'll probably tell you about a little bit later on the other side of the 5. And on the top floor, of course, we bring management, attorneys, investors, insurance people. We bring everybody to our companies to help them to start and to build and grow their companies. Of course, the SBIR program is massively important to all of our companies. Particularly at that early stage of company formation. And it's important to us too, because some of those dollars make their way back into the research labs and you get this kind of virtuous cycle of research to company back in again, which is great. So I was really delighted when Emily reached out to me a couple of months ago saying, I'm going to be at BIO. Would you like us to come and tell everybody about the NINDS and broadly NIH SBIR programs? So I said, yes, of course we would. We would be delighted to have you. So I really appreciate you reaching out to us, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself and step out of the way. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to Mohamed as well.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Emily. I'm coming from NINDS, which is the Neurological Institute of NIH, but I am going to speak today broadly to NIH. So if you're not in the neurological space, no problem. I got my PhD here at UCSD in neuroscience. I co-founded my first company with fellow grad students, and right at the end of our PhDs. And at the time, we didn't have this building, this wonderful support network. I wish we had. And I also never knew about the small business funding that was at the NIH. I wish I had. So I'm really excited and passionate about making sure that institutions like UCSD know that this resource exists. So I'm just going to start with some basics about SBIR and STTR. And actually, real quick, who here is a student? Students? Okay, faculty? Okay, and anyone who's part of a startup currently? Just I'm talking about. Okay, great. Wow, that's a really nice balance. So for those who aren't familiar, how do we get this funding from NIH for small businesses? It's a congressionally mandated program. By law, NIH has to spend just under 4% of its budget on U.S. small businesses through this mechanism. DoD does as well. And there's 2 mechanisms that there are slight differences between them, which I'll talk about a little bit. But overall, these are mechanisms. They have to be awarded to the company from NIH, but you can have academic partners, CROs, outside consultants, et cetera, through them. That award goes to the business, and the business is the ones who's applying. Now, the SBIR, STTR program is really just meant to support small businesses, but NIH uses this as a mechanism for seed funding for often very early stage companies who are working in the life sciences. Our program in particular funds many academic spinouts. We're the first check into that company. So we're really interested in trying to carry technologies from that basic research setting or that applied university setting over and de-risk that technology to the point where maybe it's ready for the market, but in a lot of cases, especially in therapeutics, medical devices, we're de-risking it to the point where you'd be successful getting private VC investment or partnerships with strategics. Oh, sorry about that. So let me talk through some of the policies and eligibility. To be eligible for this funding, you have to be a US owned and operated company with less than 500 employees. Usually the number of employees isn't the issue, but do be aware of that US owned and operated. And by owned, it means majority US owned. So 51% of that company has to be owned by United States citizens or organizations. Definitely keep in mind that your applications are allowed not just direct and indirect costs, but also 7% of your budget can be what's called a fee, which is a fee to you. It's your fee as a company that you're getting. And you can use that money however you want. There's no restriction on it. So this is a great way to get money to support IP costs. Lawyers are very expensive and you need them very early on, or other things that you couldn't use those direct or indirect funds for. So be aware of that and make sure to request that in your budget. New to the last couple of years, the congressional reissue of this program came with some requirements around national security. So keep in mind, every application is reviewed now for national security risk, which includes financial ties to countries that are foreign adversaries, which are right now classified as China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And then finally, another big point is that the work funded through the grant, primarily, it must be used within the US. So it is fine if you have people who are from foreign countries or foreign organizations, but the work has to be done within the US. And of course, I'm happy to talk with anyone about the details and specifics about their situation. Yeah.
Like you mentioned the national security risk. So, so can we use this money like to, like say CRO? Like if we look for US CRO, maybe it is 5 to 6 times more than if you do it outside.
Yeah.
So how should we handle that?
Yeah, that's a frustrating one because the fact that it might be cheaper in another country is not a sufficient justification to do the work in another country. So with your SBIR dollars, you do have to, if it can be done in the US, it needs to be done in the US. There are opportunities where if there is a very unique capability that you must use to be successful in your project, and that's only available outside the US, you can pursue a waiver to have that funding. But cost is not considered
then you have to increase the funding because like 306,000 you paid for like say NIDDK. And if I were to go for any studies, like PK studies or admin studies, if I go through Charles Ringer, that money is not sufficient.
I hear you. I can talk about how we dealt with that on the NINDS. Like we have higher phase 1 budgets to help that, but it is an institute by institute decision as to how much money they're going to allocate. And unfortunately, it's not NIH setting that policy about the foreign waivers. That's part of that SBIR STTR policy. So we can't make an exception to do non-US work if there's the capability within the US, just based on the project. Yeah.
You mentioned the institute by institute decisions.
Yes.
I don't know, maybe you're going to highlight this. Like, what's common to all of NIH SBIR versus what's different?
Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit. The things that are going to be different by institute are things like budget limits, certainly priorities and the specific funding opportunities you can apply to. Some institutes, generally larger institutes, do more like bridge funding, like second level, you can follow on and get more funding. Some of the smaller institutes don't do that. But those are going to be the major things. A lot of the policy that I'm going to talk about today is universal. And I'll try to remember to just bring up things that are, asterisk, make sure you're asking your specific institute about this.
So if I apply to NIA, it is 500,000.
That's right.
If I apply to NIDDK, 300, now getting 326, I think NIAMS is 306. So then how do we handle this?
Yeah, you should talk to the program officer for the institute you're applying to. And I'll get to this a little bit, but the first thing you should do to get started with this process is have about a draft aims page or just a 1-page, description of the project you are trying to get funded. And you can look in tools like reporter.nih.gov to try to figure out what institute is kind of aligned with the space you're in. Just make an educated guess and reach out to the small business program for that institute. And you can find that as well. You can also just reach out to me. You guys are going to have my contact info. With that document, once you sort of get engaged with a program officer who's somewhat in that space, they can find the right person for you to talk to. And you should be talking to an SBIR program staff member of the institute that you're in. Yeah, and then ask those questions. What exactly are the budget limits? We have waivers that allow bigger budgets, but it's all institute specific. So it's so crucial very early on, I would say, ideally 2 to 3 months before you're going to apply, you should figure out what institute is this going to and what are their policies around budget and what funding opportunity am I applying to. Because that's really going to change. It could change the scope of the project that you support. It could certainly change the budget. So definitely important to get that well in advance of when you're going to.
Yeah, like AMS,
Yeah.
I contacted the program official and she said, yeah, this is the budget.
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so if you,
So like 306 or something.
yeah, that's a really important, just first, you can get that in email, sometimes it takes a long time to get us on the phone, but you can get an email, yes, you're at the right institute, this is the funding opportunity you should go to, and this is the budget that applies to this project, so.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So this is a huge pot of money overall. Right now, SBIR STTR funding is at $1.4 billion annually coming out of NIH. This is, it's actually $4 billion when you take into account DoD, and DoD runs everything kind of separately. I'm not going to talk about DoD funding today, but just keep in mind, they also have a huge amount of SBIR funds, some of which go to health. You can see the spread by institute there. So there's some really institutes, it's all a product of how big that overall institute's budget is, right? It's a percentage of budget. So you can see NCI has a huge budget. NIAID, which is infectious disease, has a huge budget. NCI is cancer. National Institute of Aging, heart, lung, and blood. We're kind of out there in the middle institutes there, national NINDS. So again, there's a lot of different institutes. Each institute runs their program their own way. So it's really important to find out which institute your project fits into early on. And then some basics, again, this is going to be universal for SBIR STTR funding. There are phases of funding. There's phase 1, which is considered proof of concept. If you're in the drug development space, we usually think of this as getting to maybe preclinical efficacy in a rodent model. That typically is a good endpoint to a phase 1. You can be earlier. We do lead identification, et cetera. So it's not one size fits all. For device development, this might be prototyping and maybe bench validation, phantom validation. Depends on your technology. And again, your program officer can kind of help you figure out what phase is the best phase to go to. It does depend on the institute. Roughly, institutes have generally circled around 500K as a limit for phase 1. We do go a little higher in some circumstances. Some institutes keep it a little lower, but it's roughly, it's going to be a few $100,000 for phase 1. Those projects are typically anywhere from 6 months up to 2 years. Other institutes, DoD, NSF, often just have 6-month phase 1. So I do want to make sure you guys are aware you can go for a longer phase 1 in NIH funding. Phase 2 is kind of the next level. Again, in the drug development space, we might think of this as all the IND enabling work, your GLP tox, maybe your manufacturing, your PK/PD. A lot of that work could be done in a phase 2. That can, again, depends on exactly what institute, but a lot of institutes now are around $3 million for those awards. There are some other mechanisms as well. A fast track is when you apply for phase 1 and 2 at the same time. Direct to phase 2 is if you've already gotten proof of concept data through other funding, you might be able to come in right at that phase 2 level. Phase 2B is a continuation of that phase 2 that some institutes offer a second $3 million to bring that forward. And then there's another program called the CRP program, Commercialization Readiness Pilot, where you can fund things outside of just research and development. You can fund some other activities like maybe pursuing your regulatory approval, your IP, securing IP in Europe, maybe conducting a clinical study. You can use it for R&D if you want, market analyses, creating sales or marketing materials. So there's kind of a variety of things you can use. Those last two, phase 2B and CRP, are funding opportunities that are only open to companies who have received a phase 2 award. So it's kind of add-on funding.
So if I have to go to direct phase 2, what do I need? I need PK/PD data, and then I can go.
It depends, and that's where this is where you would want to definitely talk with the program officer that is going to be in charge, because different institutes have different lines. For us at NINDS, and I think NCI as well, we generally advise that you should, phase 1 is anything up to getting that preclinical efficacy data, often in a small animal model, rodent model, mice, rat, whatever. Usually that is the point at which we would say you have to at least have that to start to be competitive for phase 2 funding. It's not uncommon. I mean, sometimes people add exploratory PK/PD in there. I think that's helpful before you get to phase 2. But often most, the larger PK/PD studies are happening in phase 2, in my experience. But if you're at NIDDK, I would absolutely talk to NIDDK about that and see what they advise. Because again,
No, I'm going to apply for NCI right now, like in September.
yeah. Again, that would definitely be something to talk to your PO about. What stage am I ready for? Where would be the best mechanism? Would I be a good candidate for direct to phase 2?
Okay, thank you.
And I have a question. So the timeline in terms of review process is still 6 months.
Yeah, I'll have one that actually goes over all the application dates and the review timelines for you.
Okay.
That'll be helpful for that. It is ideally 6 months. It can get longer.
So ARPA-H is coming in with
Yes.
a 2-month review process. So
Yeah,
how do you guys, in a sense, because almost compete between these two grant agencies, and they're coming in with a faster review process
Sure, yeah.
versus a 6 months review process?
absolutely. Yeah, so the question was about ARPA-H and the fact that they are trying to have a 2-month review process, which is wonderful and great. And they don't go through the same peer review process that NIH uses. In terms of, unfortunately, the ARPA-H budget is much smaller, so, and you really have to fit into the interest space of ARPA-H. I would say if you fall into those interest space, 100%, you should definitely be talking to ARPA-H and getting involved with ARPA-H. ARPA-H is also setting up some really nice translational / entrepreneurial support programs to help companies as well. But in a lot of cases, the applications or projects may not fall into those interest parts of ARPA-H, in which case, you want to look over the NIH funding. Yeah.
So for phase 1, do we also need to have proof of concept?
So technically, you do not need any preliminary data for a phase 1. However, I will say to be competitive, it's wise to bring in some preliminary data. And it might vary, and that's, again, something to talk to your program officer about how strong. Sometimes the investigator doesn't have preliminary data, but there is a substantial amount of published literature that sets the scientific premise up. And that's really what you're going to be evaluated on. I'll show the review criteria in a minute, but it's the scientific premise of your project is something that's weighed. And that's where, if there's not a lot of evidence out there that your approach might be successful, that could hurt you in review. So it's good to have some preliminary data, but that doesn't necessarily need to be your own. It could be established publications.
Okay, but the reviewers
Well,
ask a lot.
They do, yeah.
I had plenty of data, but I had to go second round to get it funded. But the question they are asking, as it would be just like regular R1 type.
It's a tough review, yeah. It's a tough peer review.
Whatever you say, that's not true actually. Reviewer are something different.
Well,
You wanted to have more.
preliminary data by itself it won't be enough, but it really is something that if you're lacking it,
I think
it
that's
could
true.
hurt.
So it's very complicated. You have to have put so much data.
Yeah.
It's not like that. My idea, it will never get funded.
So by preliminary data, you mean it has to be a clinical trial or?
No, not at all. Not at all. No. Really often we are the first kind of step after basic research. Target's been identified, and maybe there's been some lead identification. Maybe not. Maybe you're coming in to do lead identification, right? It does not have to be clinical. Oh, of course.
So we're have a recording going, and so I want to try to get through what you.
Oh, sure. And it's pretty hold. Yeah.
And then we have the Q&A with Julio and another representative.
Sure.
Okay.
That makes sense. Thank you. Okay. So I'm just going to go over, we kind of started getting into this, but success rate. So roughly last year, the overall success rate for SBIR STTR was around 17%. You can see where it's been. It's hovered around there maybe since 2010. We did go through kind of a crunch during COVID. Seems like that's come up. So that's roughly where we are. This is for phase 1, which tends to be the hardest because you have a lot of people coming in for phase 1. And then for applying, so we talked about the due dates. There's across NIH, all institutes, you're going to have 3 standard due dates for SBIR funding. The next one's coming up September 5th. Now is a good time to be starting that process and starting to reach out to NIH if you're interested in applying September 5th, figuring out your program officer, figuring out the funding opportunity that you're going to apply to. The next one would be January 5th, and then we have April 5th as well. Now, the earliest award date, the earliest is typically 6 months from the time you apply. is it goes through first a peer review, and then it goes through a second level of review with the institute leadership and the institute's council. And then after it's selected for funding, it's going to take about 2 months to actually get out and get that award at a minimum. So each of those steps is like 2 months. So yes, it is long. And I will say that is the fastest it goes. A lot of times there are delays, especially if you are a new organization applying for NIH funding. That award process can take a long time because the government does all sorts of looking at your accounting and your systems, and sometimes that can cause delays as well. So very important to keep in mind that timing from when you apply to when you are getting funded. If you are interested in SBIR funding, the thing I always recommend immediately is making sure you are registering your company on SAM.gov. So to apply for SBIR funding and STTR funding through NIH, you do need to be a fully registered company, a fully formed and registered company. And you do need to be registered with SAM.gov, which is the small business registration site for US small businesses. The reason I say to do it now is that SAM.gov process is probably the most painful of all of these and can take sometimes up to 6 weeks to 2 months. Sometimes it's very smooth and easy for companies, but it can take a while. So again, if you're at all thinking about maybe pursuing a September 5th application, I would start that SAM.gov process right now. There's some other registrations, grants.gov is the NIH registration. It's how you would apply. Those are easy. You don't have to worry about those yet. But that SAM.gov, I would recommend doing ASAP. And then like we talked about, you want to make sure another first thing to do is write up that one-page description of your project and figure out who you're going to be applying to, who your program officer should be, what budget limits apply to you, what funding opportunity you're going to. And then typically, at least at NINDS, we always have a half-an-hour call with applicants to go over any questions that they have, any tips. We also host open webinars for applicants approaching up to the due date, just to kind of open Q&A hours, so anybody who's applying who has questions can jump on and ask us. So you also should, be taught, hopefully get a call with your program officer before you apply. And then I'll briefly just go over that NIH offers more than just R&D funding for companies. There are a number of programs. A lot of these have risen over the past, I'd say, 5 years. We've really grown in how we're trying to support not just the R&D, but support the company. We just launched the NIH Entrepreneurial Bootcamp program, which I highly recommend. It's not open just to companies. In fact, if you're a kind of funded company from NIH, you're not a good candidate. This is really for new companies who haven't been awarded by NIH, academics who are interested in forming a company. It is a, I think, 8-week program to really give you a crash course in starting a company. There should be an application for the next cohort coming up. I don't know exactly if they've said when the next date will be, but we've heard it's coming up. So that's something to keep an eye out for. You can probably just Google it, or you can reach out to me. I can send you the website. In addition, we have programs when you are awarded as a phase 1 company. We have programs like I-Core and C3I, which are you get really excellent coaches and mentors that will help you prove out your business model. You do something like 100 interviews with kind of customer discovery, pipeline, and supplier discovery, and you really prove out whether your business model makes sense before you go and pursue that business model. We also have ways that we try to really support companies in their work to try to fundraise or partner with strategics. So we will send you to conferences like BIO. We have a number of NIH-funded companies at BIO. We will try to help connect you with opportunities to meet investors, to meet strategics. We have company showcase pages. We kind of advertise companies to possible partners. And then we also have a diversity supplement program, which I really do want to highlight, especially to students. This is a program where awarded small businesses at NIH can apply to get extra funding to hire somebody who is from a diverse background. And as you know, the diversity is defined here. It's defined by NSF, I believe. But I believe it's still the case that women are considered an underrepresented group in biotech. And so that is a whole 50% of the population that we count towards a hire in this manner. The goal is to try to diversify the biotech industry. And so it's great for companies. It's a way for you to hire someone in. It's great for students because it can be a mechanism for you to go into a small business. So if you're at all interested in that, I'm happy to talk about it. And then finally, there's technical and business assistance, which is a way to add on to your grant to do work that is, again, not necessarily R&D, but things you need as a company, like your IP portfolio analysis, your regulatory plan, et cetera. Finally, just really quickly, I'll tell you just what it's like at NINDS, what we're looking at specific to us. Our budget is about $100 million annually. We cover all neurological indications. We cover all technologies that are in the space of neurology. So we're funding about half of our portfolios in therapeutics, whether that be small molecules or biologics. We fund a lot of diagnostics, biomarker tools, devices, digital health. And again, we will fund all the way from that very early stage, just early translational work, all the way through early stage clinical trials. These are some of the funding opportunities we have. I won't spend a lot of time on here because I know everyone's kind of coming from all different backgrounds, and this is the kind of thing I would lead you to when we talk. Yeah, go ahead.
The $100 million budget, do you spend it all every year?
We have to by law, down to the penny. And not just that we have to spend, there's these set-asides here that are, like the BRAIN initiative is a separate amount from Congress, HEAL, separate amount from Congress, 888. So we actually have 8 pots of money we have to spend to the dollar, SBIR, STTR across NINDS, and then all of those. So yes, it is the end of the fiscal year and we're trying to balance that budget. Gets a little crazy, but yes, it's spent every year by law. Yeah. We also have other translational programs. My colleague Mohamed is going to talk about NIH Blueprint, which is a really amazing program to bring novel drugs, biologics, and small molecules through the translational pipeline. So these are separately run programs, but they have tracks for small businesses that utilize that SBIR funding. That includes also our Neuro Next clinical trial network. So this is if you are approaching that clinical stage, this is a mechanism where NIH funds a number of clinical sites and clinicians to basically run a clinical trial for you. You provide the asset, and it can be really enabling to get that clinical data. So what are some of the outcomes? Just to kind of give you guys an idea. This is with an NINDS alone, recent analysis we did. Just looking at the end of the award, time at end of award for companies that have ended in the past 4 years. Those companies have gone on to raise $633 million at this time. 16 products were commercialized by the end of their SBIR funding. When we look years later, so we did an analysis of about 500 awards between 2008 and 2016. We found that 58% of our companies had raised some kind of follow-on funding. There were 72 products that were commercialized. And then since the inception back in 1983, if we look at all the NINDS funded companies, there's $26 billion that have been raised by them, 79 have IPO'd. We have only done the hard work of tracing that funding to 92 products. We're sure there's many, many more. But that's some examples. These are some of the recent successes. We funded Reveragen for their Duchenne muscular dystrophy small molecule, Agamree, which was approved by the FDA this fall. Noctrix Health had their neurostimulation device for RLS approved. Their De Novo approved by the FDA a year ago in April. Durafuse is a novel spinal clip for Neuromedica that was also got their 510K a couple of years ago. And then Vivistem, which is a implanted vagal nerve stimulation system for stroke rehab, spun out of UT Dallas. They got their PMA 3 years ago, and they just had another round of $30 million as they start to kind of disseminate to the stroke clinical population. And I think that's it. This is our team, my wonderful team. I lead the program. That's my email. I'm also very Googleable. Everything's public. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help direct you to wherever you need to go. I'll just double check this is the last thing. Yeah, okay, so I'll just put that there while we transition. Thank you, I think we're gonna do Q&A afterwards.
So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
A couple of words.
Of course, yeah. Then hand up to Mohamed, just wanna make sure.
Before Mohamed gets up, I just wanted to say, oh yes,
Oh,
over here.
sorry.
Hi. So before I leave, unfortunately, I just wanted to sort of, as a compliment to what you have been saying, all of the fantastic resources across the NIH to help you with all of this stuff. There are a huge amount of resources across UCSD as well, right? There's about 14 different accelerator programs here. This building is, one of the largest of those programs. For all of you who are starting companies, we will help you with anything. We'll help you access all of that, but we will also help you find your management teams, find your advisors, get your IP together, get your IP strategy, get your finances, your pro formas. If you need insurance, we'll put you in front of the right people. And when you're ready, we will put you in front of the early stage investors and make those introductions. And to have the university doing that for you helps a lot, rather than just kind of cold calling people, right? Shane over there in the corner, say hi, Shane. Shane is a gateway to a lot of those resources. So if you don't know Shane, you should get to know Shane. And we'll help you with any of that kind of stuff, as is Julio, who you will meet in a few minutes. Also, we do specific SBIR programs here, right? So we do workshops where we actually walk you through all those registrations, because SAM is a real difficult one sometimes, right? We have counselors, or whatever they call themselves, coming in who will work with you one-on-one with your grant, with your registrations, because they understand what's viewed favorably at the institutes, right? So we have all of that stuff for you. So I do encourage you, go to the innovation.ucsd website, go talk to Shane. This is the DIB, Design Innovation Building. Go to the DIB website. There's a whole bunch of workshops and seminars on all of these aspects. So it's all there for you. We do encourage you to avail of it. Also, I believe you said we could share these slides?
Absolutely.
Yes, so we will share these slides with everybody. We're also recording this. We'll make it available through our website. So you'll have all of that information. And we'll also, the next time we do an SBIR workshop, we will send that information out to everybody as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to both of you.
That's it. I'm going to head up to Mohamed to talk a little bit about
I'm not going to be too long. So basically, I was tagging along with Emily here just to mention about two programs that kind of like they are similar to SBIR, except we provide you with some help in terms of consultants and contracts. So the two programs, the first one is the Novel Therapeutics Network. We refer to it as BPN. And the second one is based on a HAIL initiative. It's also for drug development, focused on non-opioid analgesics. But the concept, it's kind of like the same, and you will see that later. Just to mention, for these two programs, we have about 12 national health institutes that contribute to funding of these two programs. But just to reemphasize that one is focused on pain, and the other one is kind of like a general CNS disorders. It can be neurological disorders or psychiatric disorders, for example, or rare diseases. So just keeping that in mind. And also, I put in some of the application reference. For the BPM, for example, it's a PAR-24043 for academia. And for industry, it's the PAR-24-063. The only difference between the two, the first one is focused more on principal investigators that works at the university. The second one is focusing on startup company or industry. Okay, so these are the institutes that contribute to that. And I heard some of the question early on in terms of entry criteria. People can apply early on, what we call the discovery stage, and basically there is some requirement that are needed for that. For example, a rigorous biological rationale for the intended approach or therapeutic area in mind that you have to pursue. Of course, a promising small molecule or biologics. It doesn't have to be very potent, but let's say 1 micromolar small molecule that came up after the screening would be enough for this case, of course, with some established cell-based assays and some in vivo efficacy assays. That's at the entry level to discovery. Of course, someone can apply the development stage, which is kind of like more advanced. This is more or less when people have already their clinical candidate nominated or selected. It's a drug-like compound. All it's needing is pre-IND studies, for example, safety file, toxicology studies, and so forth. That's the development stage. And of course, with the CROs, we provide CROs to do medicinal chemistry, or in the case for biologics, we do the same. We have CROs that can do that. And for PK talks, we also have contractors like SRI, ITRIT, GRL, that they can follow up on whatever optimization or investigation at that level for pharmacokinetic study, or kind of like a small toxicology study and so forth. In terms of manufacturing, we work with Curia and MRI Global, and this is, to prepare for the API scale-up and the GMP API, drug product and formulation. This is all provided through the CROs. I think once you are successful through your application, we form a development team where the PI and one of our consultants will be kind of like leading the program, and the NIH representative, someone like myself, will be part of that team and making sure that the milestones are met in a timely manner, but also providing help and direction. Most of our program managers, they have several years of industry experience, and they have been like an asset to these teams as well. And also we manage the contract themselves. For me, for example, I manage the DMFP contract. This is for the manufacturing. So I put together the statement of work for each project and follow up with the contractor. So the PI themselves, he or she can get what we call a grant funding, and this is to support the pharmacology, both the in vivo and the in vitro pharmacology. As you would imagine, if you are working on a serotonin target, for example, you have an array of receptors that you want to achieve certain selectivity, and therefore you want to have established in your lab. Same thing for the efficacy, the in vivo models that they need to be established, and this is why we provide grants to the PI. But anything else, it's supported by the NIH money through the CRO. Okay, this is just to give you an idea. All these programs are milestone driven, and we would expect, from one year to the next year, a certain milestone to be achieved. In general, the first, the UG3 phase, generally that's where we want to see rigorous assay established. Sometimes people have assays, in vitro assays established, but we want to see certain criteria like a Z prime factor or reproducibility and so forth. And also we want the team to start thinking about the screening funnel, how they are going to take their compound through the different steps that may lead to a clinical candidate. And also it will be, at that early stage, it will be mainly chemistry. For example, people will come with a hit around a micromolar, like I said, but it needs improving potency, it needs improving maybe permeability, and so forth. So that's where the SCR activity will come in. And that's how we put the milestone. So the second year could be focused still on pharmacology, maybe efficacy in the animal model. Chemistry, it will be more focused. They may have learned some SCR around the molecule, and they may be able to say, okay, now we solved the solubility, we may need to solve the selectivity, for example, and so forth. And then there will be lead optimization stage, which at the end of it, we should have a clinical candidate nominated. And after that, it will be mainly dose response finding, dose range finding studies in rodents and large animal. Generally, we use dogs and so forth until all the pre-IND enabling study are done, and then we prepare for an IND submission package to the FDA, and we support all that. We work with regulatory CROs and so forth, and we run the clinical trial for the specific project, either through PPD or Duke University. These are the two contractors that we run our clinical phase 1 with. So I'm going to stop here and just say, give you an idea about the people who are involved in these two programs. In general, each program manager manage at least 4 projects in their portfolio. And like I said earlier, these people, they all have a long experience in industry, which is a big asset for the projects that they are working on. And just to mention, Dr. Charles Simon, he's the program director for the PPM program, and Marianne Pelly-Mounter, she is the program director for the PTDP, or for the non-opioid analgesic program. And you can reach out to them for any question if you have. And also I brought up flyers for you to take and as a reference. So please feel free to do that. And also feel free to contact me if you have further questions. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
We're going to be here for Q&A. And then I also just want to point out my colleague, Sarah Semeni, if you want to wait, is here as well from our small business group. I think we're going to be around after the Q&A to answer questions as well. So you can also find her. Sure, yeah, Sarah, you want to come up? Do we have a chair? Oh yeah, there's another one right there.
You have to adjust the camera.
Thanks, Shane.
Grab one.
Do you want to maybe Sarah go here because then he's going to moderate. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Shane. All right. Fantastic. Looking forward to the Q&A with the panel here. We'll introduce in just a second. I'm Julio De Unamuno. I'm the executive director of HomeLab at UC San Diego. We actually have a program together, the UCSD Venture Catalyst Program. I run Track 2 on the biotech side, also known as the UC Foundry Program. So we've been running it right across campus, as Paul said, 38 startups over the last 5 years, $1 billion in exits and fundraisings. Innovation focuses are in novel therapeutics, so gene and cell therapy, small molecules, biologics, as well as AI and biotech. We've got a couple of our startups over here. There you are in the crowd, as well as tools and diagnostics, and then biomaterials and sustainability, things like lab grown meat. So very excited to be here and enjoying the panel. I know we have just finished our first cohort under the UC Foundry. And so they've been schooled on how to do the business development, go out there, do some of the customer discovery calls, build the foundations, put their team together, and then now start pitching investors. And while they're doing that, which usually takes about 9 months, we are trying to get them exposed to the grant funding, the non-dilutive side now, and kind of getting the ABCs there. So very excited to have you guys today. So as a friendly icebreaker, let me just start with a show of hands. How many PhDs in the room? How many MBAs? How many MBAs and PhDs? Okay. So first question, introduce yourselves as well at the same time. And then please let us know who writes the better grants, PhDs or MBAs?
Oh, I mean, honestly, so I would say there's very few times, well, we don't know who writes it, but the PI is almost always the scientific lead. The kind of PI that we see on our grants, I would say, is almost always PhD or MD. There are times when the PI's had a different background, whether it be an MBA or sometimes that completely different. We have parent-led companies for really rare pediatric disorders that they start a whole biotech, and they're amazing. So every so often we get someone from the other side, but I think you do for writing it. If you're going through the NIH grant process, you've got to put quite a bit of technical detail in there for SBIR grants. And so I think it is necessary to rope in the PhDs and MDs for some of that, at least the research strategy section. The problem is that you can't get too in the weeds. You got to also make sure you're making sure it's clear what you're doing to anybody who's reviewing that grant, that they understand what the need is, how you're providing a unique and novel solution, et cetera. So kind of need both pieces, which is what you need in every company, both sides. So yeah.
So, sure, I would. Back to that question. I mean, I think the interesting question that you're asking is just that the advantage of having an MBA, at least that I would think, only being a scientist, physician scientist, is that I guess how important is it to actually stress the significance of the marketability of the actual product at the point of being at track 1 and track 2? Or is it really going to be evaluated only on, as you said, feasibility? So
it's a great question.
Yeah.
In phase 1, so you are evaluated on commercial potential in phase 1. Right. However, in a phase 1 application, so for both a phase 1 and a phase 2, you're going to have that research strategy section. It's only 6 pages in phase 1. It's 12 in phase 2. So you have a lot less real estate to describe your project in phase 1. In addition, in a phase 2, you get an extra 10 pages to describe your commercial plan, which is where you can talk about your IP, the business expertise on your team, your advisory board, your go-to-market plan, your fundraising plan. You don't have that in phase 1. So I think this is absolutely a tricky part of phase 1s because it is essential, and usually what we might advise is including like a significance section in your research plan that really gets to why there is a need for this and how you're going to be, a solution. It might depend on your technology, what's important to bring up there. For instance, when we have software or digital tools, I stress the importance of mentioning IP or how you're going to have protection from fast followers. And sometimes those digital tools can be hard to patent. In other cases, there might be other things that, really make sure you address this because that's going to be one of the questions that comes up even at phase 1. So that's where you should probably bring that up with your program officer. But you are evaluating on a commercial potential in phase 1.
But not as much so as phase 2.
In phase 2, it becomes a much bigger part of the story.
And another way of asking this question, sorry to harping on this, is who are your reviewers?
That's another really great question. Do you want to talk about that, Sarah?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things I've mentioned. Let me go back to his starting question. So first of all, I think that I'm going to second what Emily mentioned, but I can't really say PhD versus MBA. It's just a matter of the team. And I want to add another factor to it. Like many of the product, we are in the translational part. Many of the product that we are seeing, it's the successful one, they have a very good collaboration with the clinical side as well. So it's very important that you're getting the perspective of not just the great science that you do in the lab, but you're also getting the perspective of, some of the people that there are in the industry. What is the market? What is your competitive landscape? Plus, you need to have the perspective of the clinicians because you might come up with many times, my background is engineering, many times we see in the engineering lab, they're coming up with a great design, great ideas, but they don't know what they're going to do with it. There's missing connections with those clinicians. But if you have the insight with that clinical world, you have a better, way, kind of like succeeding with your grant. And in terms of the reviewers, when we go to the review sessions, it's mixed. Like some of the things we will see, like the people, like I see, like sometimes there are in middle of the surgery, they're very dedicated. People like in the review, so they're very dedicated. They're like sitting, putting hours of the time, listening carefully. And oh my God, like everything you're writing there, it's gonna be judged. They're talking about it. You're fighting for your application. So you're in the, like you're writing it, but then you don't see behind the scenes. So what you're saying is you're in the spotlight when you have that things written. So you have to be doing your job, I guess, very carefully.
Well, I guess let me just be blunt.
The competition.
Industry, are we talking about you're going to have VC? I mean, obviously,
No,
are you going to have anybody in the industry?
I wish we did, but no. So typically the panel is going to be composed of clinicians, which offer really wonderful perspectives. And then a lot of, translational researchers, so a lot of PhDs and MDs who are also researchers. Many of them are themselves SBIR investigators because I will say, if you are thinking of doing SBIR funding, being a reviewer is a really wonderful way to understand the system and understand how to write a good grant. So that's the other, I would say, piece. You can always see the rosters if you're interested in finding out who's on the panel. Those rosters are published. And one note I want to make, so that all of the SBIR STTR grants are reviewed within the Center for Scientific Review by technology area, not necessarily by institute. So for instance, neurotherapeutics, there is a small business panel for neurotherapeutics. It's bringing in all the neurotherapeutics apps from NINDS, from mental health, from aging, from drug abuse, right? Those are all going to that panel. And sometimes I think people, after they get a review they're not happy with, think, oh, maybe I can change institute. It won't change your review aspect at all. And then maybe Mohamed, you can talk to the review for BPN because it's a bit different.
Yeah, for the BPN, so we have a panel of scientists. Mainly, we try to track people with expertise in industry. We try to also include clinicians as well. So they are part of the review panel, the peer review, and they are the one who, if you want, score each application. And we thought it's been very successful because these people understand the hurdles that the someone in academia could be facing, but also understand what the BPN is offering as well, because sometimes somehow people miss that part where we come in with providing the CRO, like Curia, for example, doing all the medicine and chemistry and helping with the lead optimization. It's a huge investment, and it's a lot of money. So this is how it is, in general, run, at least for some of these products. Same thing for the PTDP, for the analgesic, non-opioid analgesic program as well.
So before we open up more questions to the audience, I just wanted to make sure we finished with our intros. I knew that was going to be a juicy question. Just want to finish up the intros, and we got a couple of strategic questions, kind of high level, and we'll get through that, and then we'll open it up back for some more questions. First, though, I want to make sure we've met Emily and Mohamed, and we've got Sarah up here with us.
Yes, so I'm Sarah Sameni. I'm part of NINDS program, a small business. I were a graduate of my PhD in biomedical engineering from UC Irvine, and we're also at Salk Institute for during my postdoctoral study doing computational science.
So you're talking a lot about the program, you're really focusing on neuro. Can you tell us about the startup landscape? What are you seeing get funded in this space? Is it the traditional small molecules, biologics? We now see a lot of interest in everything from cell and gene therapy that we were just talking earlier about psychedelics, and then everything's AI. Every other startup's in AI and this and that. Love to hear what you guys are seeing get funded in this space.
Yeah, so I think what's getting funded tends to scale, but what's coming in, right? At least in our program, this is different in different institutes. We don't prioritize any particular. We don't have a bucket for this type of technology or this indication. So it really is what comes in and what's really strong and scores well. We've had an explosion of biologics for the past 5 years. I mean, really, it's now probably a solid quarter of our portfolio, and I mean the biologics is just so many different flavors. We have really, cutting edge cell therapies, gene therapies, gene editing approaches, RNA approaches, ASOs, of course, antibodies. So that has been an explosion. Also, we've seen a big rise in biomarker / diagnostics as well, right? With the rise of, we've seen this with ML now. AI is very buzzy, coming from bio. It's all talk about AI. I mean, a lot of that's really just the machine learning has been going on and evolving for years. But having the capacity for recording huge data sets of patients as they progress in a disease or as they take a therapeutic. One of the big challenges in neurological, if you're developing a drug for a neurological population, even if everybody in that population is diagnosed with, say, ALS or Alzheimer's or PD or whatever, there really is a lot of variability within that population that we don't fully understand. And so when those clinical trials are so expensive and so risky, it's really hard to get investment in them. It's hard for strategics to put that investment in them if they're not confident they're going to meet outcomes. And so there's been a demand from the field to better be able to stratify patients, to better be able to predict disease progression. It also helps with things that patients are demanding, like having earlier time to diagnosis, better match with the therapeutics available to know what's going to work for them. And I think we're at a point where the technology and the computational methods are really in a place where we can start kind of going crazy and taking it. We see everything from the neurological space, everything from motion data, speech data, eye movements, EEG, EKG, heart rates, just everything you can imagine, biofluid samples in addition. People collecting these enormous data sets and then doing some really cutting edge and powerful mathematical methods to try to derive meaning and predictive values from them. And that's been a big space as well.
It used to be called bioinformatics in the old
days.
Right. Now they're putting AI all over the place. Anyway, I'm going to speak for the BPM programs and the PTDP. Obviously, for the brain, anything for the brain, you'll be better off with a small molecule, honestly. We start getting some biologics, but still overwhelmingly small molecule, because it's easy, you can work around it, you can get it to the brain and so forth. But if I have to put a number, maybe 80-20%, but the biologics are coming, like Emily mentioned, they are, creeping in. They are more into it. We said, cell therapy and gene therapy, yes, they are coming in for rare diseases and so forth. So we start seeing that. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of investment. It will cost a lot compared to the small molecule, but we're seeing application.
And we've got one of our portfolio companies is working on a small molecule to reverse the aging of brains, and using that technology as the core to help treat neurodegenerative diseases.
I think I met with the person at that bio.
Renew Biosala over there is a great founder. So.
Oh, sorry. Do you mind if I follow up on one thing that Mohamed, which is the cost of biologics? So this is another big issue. This is not neurospecific. This is, I think, going to be a problem. It's both a problem at the early stage when you're kind of surviving off of grant funding, because manufacturing your biologic, your cell therapy, gene therapy, et cetera, you have to do that at the preclinical stage, right? You have to get through regulatory. And it can be, I've had companies that have gotten quotes of $10 million, to manufacture their gene therapy. So it's incredibly expensive versus a small molecule, right? That manufacturing is cheap and you can get through that GLP tox and, no problem. And then it's an issue when you go, hit the market, right? We're seeing issues with what kind of costs or associated with gene therapy will the market accept, will insurance accept? So that's just, it's an unknown because it is new, but it's something to be aware of, I think, across the field, that those costs are barriers to overcome for sure.
I just want to add one more quick thing is, I guess there are like two parts to your questions is, what we are getting versus what is getting funded. So what we are getting, we are getting explosion of biologics. We are getting a lot, and we are recently kind of a transition. We are getting more, AI is very hot, so we are getting a lot of AI recently to the portfolio. However, what is being funded is mainly several factors. It might be all over, it might be small molecules, it might be like biologics, it can be different things. But what is important is, I always say to applicants, it's like you have to focus on what your expertise and group expertise is, rather than just following the whole thread. So what is your expertise, and kind of really narrow down to what you want to do first. Sometimes you're applicants coming with the wide measure of the things they're going to do. Is okay, so you have this cool device and you want to solve everything with it. It's very good, but then narrow it down. It's what is your market? What's the first things you're going to do? And then you have a better chance of getting passed through that round, of getting funded.
I love that. That's so aligned with the investor side. So we're, investors, we work with a lot of other co-investors as well. And I think there's this adage out there that talks about betting on the jockey, not the horse.
Right.
So we're seeing that translate into the life science side too, which is, those first early investors, they're not going to invest in your technology, right? Most of them aren't making the bet on that, believe it or not. What they're making the bet on is you, Emily, or you, Mohamed, right? You, the entrepreneur, because what they really want to see is, given the technology works, right? Are you going to bust your gut to get this to the market, right? Are you going to miss the birthdays, the family dinners, right? So, the prime of your careers, right? To go and die on a mountain for making the startup successful, and that's fulfilling the social obligation. Now, one of the challenges right now is navigating a landscape that is thinner in terms of the capital to invest in these companies. So I'm curious, the portfolio that's coming out, what are you seeing? How are you seeing those successful ones kind of navigate the funding landscape today relative to the building a venture scale?
That's a great point. I think companies that we've seen. So yes, there's the crunch in private funding. It's kind of retracted. Federal funding is also at a point where it's really hard. Our federal budget this year was flat. Brain Initiative got a huge cut. And I think the companies, the translational stuff that's suffering is right when they're at that part of early stage clinical trials in particular, because now a lot of investors are saying, well, come back when you have clinical data, right? And those are bigger budgets and they're harder to get funded through NIH. So we have a lot of companies saying, I'm really just trying to get my phase 1 or my phase 2 funded. I think companies that have been successful are often ones that had, a lot of times while we're providing that non-dilutive funding. Companies are also fundraising privately, right? You go after everything. And so I think companies that have been successful are ones that maybe had already some seed rounds and some investors that have really good networks that they've been able to bring in, whether it be a fractional CEO or something, someone who really can help them build the relationships to be successul with getting private funding. Sometimes it's conjoint with NIH funding. Some of the mechanisms like phase 2B are really meant to bring in matching funds. So we'll put $3 million up, and then if you can get an investor who'll put another, that can kind of de-risk it for private funding. But it's a very challenging space. We have companies, kind of going through it right now. And I think being able to have successfully built a network of investors, people who work with you, people who trust you, people who can vouch for you, can help you get through that period.
What you're gonna ask?
Yeah, well, what I was about to add, what we have noticed, at least for BPN programs, for example, that's the kind of like the oldest program we had. Some of this company right away, if the target is hot, I'll give you like sodium channel 1.8 for pain. Everyone was looking for one, and we were working on one. It was partnered right away to Vertex, and we have other. I should have brought an example of some of the successful programs that went through. But definitely it's a combination. If it's a small company, it seems like they have an easy path to roll into a bigger partnership with another company. But people in academia, they need a little bit of hand-holding, to help them to move, pitch their program and so forth. And we do. And Emily went through all the resources that the NIH through the SBIR programs offer to this PI. And most of them, they take the courses and move forward fine.
Do you talk at all on the portfolios to get the venture funding, right? Do you talk about some of the metrics that they're being subjected to, and are you have any proxies that you're trying to have them build up to?
We ideally, yes. So I think for both Mohamed Blueprint and for us,
yes.
We understand that a therapeutic is very unlikely to get to the clinic or get to the market just on NIH funds, right? The way that the US system works is we're using that federal funding to de-risk a technology to the point where it would be de-risked enough for investments and for those millions of private dollars to go into that asset and carry it forward. So it's really important for us. That's what a lot of our time is at Bio, right? Meeting with venture groups, meeting with strategics, meeting with search and eval teams to make sure to understand what their perspective is and how we can best prepare our companies. Some of that is technical milestones. I'll say a program that arose out of such discussions was a program called the Embedded Entrepreneur Program under the HEAL Initiative, where it's a pilot right now. We have 4 companies that are going it, but it's a program where NIH will fund companies for up to $400K to bring in business expertise into the team, into the leadership team at least 50%. So it could be a chief business officer, it could be a CEO, it could be a CFO, VP business development, but they're provided funding to bring that person in and then to conduct partnering efforts. And that really came out of lots of conversations where, as you said, we bet on the jockey. And if, a lot of VCs, if they don't see, when they put that team slide up, they don't see someone who has 20 years of expertise bringing stuff to clinic or partnering or getting license deals, right? That's what they want to see. And they want to see that person is part of the team, not just a consultant, not just an advisor. And when we talk to our companies, they're like, oh, we know we need that. We have no money, right? There's no way for them to get that person. And so this was built to fill that gap and to hopefully get more successful handoff of the companies we're funding into private dollars.
And if I may add to that, at least for the neuroscience field in general, compared, let's say, to oncology, what we have seen, big pharma and even mid-sized pharma, they were pulling out. And this is why the NIH, came in with the SBIR program and like the BPN program and the HAIL initiative to invest and de-risk some of these targets and making them more exciting for partnership and so forth. So this is where you see a lot of money coming to the NIH in neuroscience from the government side, to de-risk all these targets, for example.
So another thing I want to add to that is like the companies that mostly are successful is they know the market very well and they know who. So you're a small company, so you're going to be acquired, but by like mid-sized or bigger sized companies. So they know, who they're gonna like partner later on from the beginning. So they're like targeting very well. And usually like VC, when we talk to them, it's like when you're funded by NIH, government is like funding your company. So you have a better chance, getting, VC funding as well, because government already, investing on you. So you have a very better chance of getting VC.
I love it when we talk to a lot of our pre-seed and seed stage investors. We talk about you can have a big idea in a big market, but you have to have also the team that's going to win.
That's very important. And I want to go back to what you mentioned already is the idea and what you're really dedicated, and it's kind of like resonate with you is like very important, because when we're talking to our teams and all the stages that you have to pass, it's very hard getting funding, and it's everything can be very difficult. But then if you're really dedicated to it, and also many of the companies you ask, who gets successful, if you're like your company is like just doing one thing and then that fails, so then your company is just ended. So there are two parts, I would say. It's like one part is the grant writing, which you need to be very focused on one thing. The second thing is your company. So the company shouldn't be just that one thing that you apply for a grant. It should have, other capabilities. So if that fails, you have the capability to kind of like pull up and then start, all over again.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about that as far as, we try and the counterbalance of that for some of the teams is, also that don't take that advice as be the smallest big pharma company that's got 5 or 6 programs, because then you run through that million really quick and you're asking for another mill and you have none of them over the line. But I think the point there is develop core technologies. Don't just go chase the shiny thing.
Exactly.
Right? Because if you get some bad readouts, right, you want the flexibility to have been building something that can have multiple indications or other applications.
We hear that from VCs too, right? They're interested in platform approaches. It could be still a small molecule, maybe, but you have a target that maybe could apply to many indications. We hear that a lot. It's not all we fund. We do fund some things that are really specific for really specific disorders, but it's a common thing we hear from VCs for sure.
Along the regulatory side, so it's really interesting right now. We've got the CHIPS Act, which is hugely impacted the semiconductor, and then now we've got the legislation that's overnight banned major actors in the space like WuXi, who is doing a lot of the CRDMO work.
Yes.
I think they have $500 million in revenue and overnight, no new projects that are funded, or no new projects period, I think, in the US.
Right.
And so it was really interesting to see. I hadn't heard of the BBN, for example, in a while. We actually have a startup in the AI side of all things, helping startups on board with new seed RDMOs now that this is a need. So I'm wondering if you can, actually, before you answer, a lot of our startups have also been exposed to venture studio models, right? Where the value proposition is both funding, but also their partnerships of CROs and CDMOs that they can partner with and augment teams with. So it's really interesting to hear that the government is actually putting resources in place to make those connections to help think about the scale up and CMC work and things like that.
Yes, we do, and because what we have noticed, I mean, it's not fair to someone in academia, for example, PIs working on some basic science. It's really, and they want to move to translational science. It's not straightforward. Although now I think university, they are building up their capabilities to be more focused on drug discovery, drug development. But prior to that, you didn't have that options. This is what we provide, right? And this is the, if you don't have the means to do it yourself, this is, we come in and help you with that. So we have a panel of consultants, medicine chemists, pharmacologists, clinical pharmacologists, CMC experts, all part of that program, and with the goal to help move forward, some novelty in the field.
It's really amazing. If you guys haven't spoken to a VC studio, just to put some perspective there, around do I get non-dilutive grant funding or do I get venture funding? I think all of us would probably agree it's an and, not an or. And these VC studios, because it's such a huge value proposition to help bring in the scalability side and think through that, often take between 30 to 40% equity in your company. They want to, share that
Yes.
that co-founder chair with you in a lot of ways. So the fact that you can potentially save 30 to 40% equity
Do
and
this
now
through
work with the
NIH.
government to get those same partnerships, if not better, because I imagine one of the things with the VCs, I mean I love VCs, hey, I'm on the investor side, but to have things teed up with the same arm that's going to eventually get involved with like the approvals, right, in the regulatory process. I imagine that there's got to be a tighter connection there where you guys are having conversations about how to not only scale this up, but also navigate the regulatory framework.
Yeah, so we have what we call pre-IND meetings. So before we move into a large amount of money to be spent on safety, harm, and toxicology studies, we have a pre-IND meeting where we have specific questions. Are you, for example, I'm just kidding, are you okay with this toxicology studies, because we have to outline everything. They may say yes, they may say, well, no, but we prefer instead of 28 days, maybe do 3 months study. This is just to give you an example, but there is an interaction to de-risk any potential regulatory issue down the road. So we do that.
That's amazing. There's another nugget there. Some of you guys, if you haven't had that entrepreneurial journey, when you go out and fundraise, right, you fundraise in different milestones with the investors. Sometimes it's setting up your lab. Sometimes it's getting some in vitro data, in vivo data, your animal models. One of them is the pre-IND meeting. Mm-hmm. So you get a pre-IND meeting, you can now go to investors and your company is de-risked. That's a funding event. You can actually raise money off of that alone. Yeah. So that's amazing.
And for in general, you do the same thing when you go prior to initiating phase 2. You do the same thing. You run it by the FDA, you de-risk, and then you move forward, right? So we are trying to, incorporate all what the industry pursue into this program. So to make it very successful, very easy to partner later on and then move forward.
So my last question, and we'll open it up to the audience here.
Yes.
Is there a difference or an emphasis on grant funding at the federal level, whether it's university-owned IP versus intellectual property maybe developed by the individual or the company themselves independently?
In my experience from the SBIR review perspective, no. There's always the question of, is there the IP? Is it secure? Do they have, does the company have licensed it, or isn't that licensing in the process? There's a question about the IP itself, the quality of the IP, for drugs, is it composition of matter or is it formulation, methods of use? But I don't think, we always love, and it's great when we can draw the story between, say, an NIH-funded lab who discovered something and is now moving it. But that's not really something that we fund based on. It's a great story when we have it. It's when we like to, use as a great success example. But I haven't seen that come up as a big differentiator in enthusiasm of our funding. It really is more, all these other things we talk about is that it's a really innovative and potentially high significance, high impact approach to solving a problem that for us is in the neurological space, right? That's really where our focus is. If it happens that there's a nice story about NINDS, academic funding leading to a startup and moving forward, that's great. But no, I don't think but I can't think of cases where the sort of source of that IP, whether it's at the university or outside, has been a big differentiator in enthusiasm.
Yeah, I know. I disagree, Emily. I think just to add on in terms of IP, which is something I want to mention, is that NIH doesn't own or claim any IP with all this funding, right? And of course, we want to be, so whoever comes in under these programs, we want them to be successful. And one of the conditions is you are building IP. They have to show us that, they have maybe some new SME, small molecule of interest, and it will be protected, through patent, maybe provisional patents already. That should be discussed and included in the application. And that's how you can sell it later on, right? Otherwise, if you don't have IP, you are dead, right?
So as they mentioned, so this is something I would say, like the IP issue is something like the funder, I guess, should it's worried. are they licensing the IP later on if they want to sell it? What is the negotiation part? How much they're going to be sold? How much they have to pay back to the university? But in terms of us, like as a funding agency, as long as we just care, what's the IP, how strong the IP is, but we mainly think about, the innovation, the science, what makes us, because we are mainly scientists as well, does it makes us also exciting? What's the competitiveness of that company? Yeah, that's what we care more.
All right, fantastic. So
maybe like one more, so there's time also to.
we're actually all done with questions. We're going to open this up to the audience. Thank you. Let's give it a warm hand for our panel here.
So my CSO and I are expert in oncology, but if we want to go in your institute,
Yeah.
can we come in to pediatric brain cancer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So brain cancer is a shared area between NINDS and NCI. And basically kind of what I say, if you send a project description and exactly what you're doing and what you're hoping to have funded, this is where we would take that and we would have that the document we use to then talk with our colleagues and determine, hey, is this on the NCI line? Is this on the NINDS line? And then we can get back to you and confirm where that application should go. That's a great.
Okay, I have two questions. First, can you help us, do you have some plan for commercialization phase 2? Do you have some kind of something available from NIH? How should we write commercial plan, or can we get it from UCSD? What kind of guidance, like phase 2?
Yes, so when you're a phase 1 funded company, the programs I mentioned, ICOR in particular is for all technologies, and there's a program C3I, which is for devices, specifically medical technologies. But that program is, you apply to it and you're selected to participate, and I think it's 12 weeks, and you're given a really wonderful mentor who helps walk you through both the business model and that leads to building a commercialization plan section that would then help you in your phase 2 application. So that is one of the mechanisms where you get.
Yeah, so I can apply now because
if you're a phase 1 funded company, you'd be eligible for the ICOR program.
Okay.
And you should talk to whoever your program officer is for that phase 1 award, would be the one to kind of help direct you to that.
Okay.
I guess the main thing is, you kind of like get into the NIH, like you get to the phase 1, and then once you're there, then you, I guess, like, your program officers and everything, and then each IC, they have their own, program as well. So then you can have the conversation and see what is available for you.
And also, do you have any info, I wanted to do the PK studies for peptides. I failed several times. I have to several, at UCSD, Approval Labs, our UCSD core, they failed to do the peptide PK because they do not know how to extract from the plasma. So do you know any information? Somebody is doing PK?
So it's something where, again, I would talk to your program officer. So I can't give you specific partners that you should work with in your project. It would be us directing your work,
so
which we can't do.
I should contact my program officer.
But yeah, I would talk to your program officer about how, and to the level that they're comfortable, resources they have to help you figure out that person. But generally, we do have people say, well, who should I work with on this? Who should I work with on that? We can point you to how to find people. We can point you to how to maybe search people doing certain research or with certain capabilities through NIH. But we're not allowed to sort of direct you to specific people or create specific partnerships, if that makes sense.
No, I know I have the information I can approach this company or who is doing the PK studies for peptides. So that information is enough for me. I can approach them.
You're welcome to, yes.
Yeah.
On the on the commercialization side, just in terms of resources the university provides, so there's a couple programs here on campus that can actually help you in the commercialization section of your grant submissions.
Okay, then I come here.
So the Rady School of Management, they have a program called the Venture Fellows. So they're always recruiting every semester. You can go talk to Tim Schwartz over there. They will take in a handful of companies and actually have the MBA students involved to help them with those. And there are some guiding hands, kind of supervising to make sure that's on track. But nothing better than get a whole team of MBAs to help out on the commercialization side. So that's
before you go to the question, I'm just so amazed by what UCSC, to be honest, what UCSC is doing. One, I'm jealous. A lot of this wasn't here, a decade ago when I was here. But also, it's not something you see at every institute. I just want to make sure you guys are all aware. This is not that have this kind of support everywhere. So please take advantage of it. It's really incredible.
And also, if there is like a peer network or if there's a networking event, definitely go to that, because some of the questions that you have or some of the things that you need, there are other companies that there might not be your competitor. They're at the same stage that you are. And then you can just share information.
Okay.
That will be a great benefit that we can do.
Yep. We also have the micro MBA program, so there's a life science consulting group that will also help with commercialization plans. At HomeLab for our foundry companies, we also have associate fellows who are also there to support. Shane, am I missing anything on the commercialization plan from
Who
OIC?
should I approach? If I can have the email, who today?
Shane and I, Shane's a great contact right over there. He jointly helps run HomeLab as well as all the other programs that OIC is involved in on campus.
I mean, Paul mentioned that there's these specific accelerators, and then within each of those, there are university partnerships or sponsored research grants that are typically managed by faculty or project, but one that allows us for a broader relationship to develop. So if you're looking for expertise off campus, partners, even funding, talked about the studio models and others. And I think actually there's someone from an investment group here, not to put them on the spot. But there are groups that are keen in looking for ways to collaborate with researchers. As many of you know, it's a big ecosystem. It's hard to find a way, even as scientists here, it's even harder for those outside the university to help support and commercialize.
So shameless plug to meet those resources and more. We have the All Campus Happy Hour on June 13th, where we have folks from all of those groups as well as all across campus and the community to help out. So that'll be a great one. Hitachi's sponsoring that one.
I have a question. So it's more kind of specific based on the new things. I think you mentioned, Julio, psychedelic use. NIH for many years has not really pushed for a lot of psychedelic research is being done in different organizations that are not necessarily government organizations. However, with the recent approval and the more recent approvals in PTSD and the use of many of these analogs to treat PTSD, resistant to medication, depression, how is kind of NIH view on kind of bringing in companies that are doing psychedelic research in that space, knowing clearly they might not also get funded for those? So maybe if you could speak about that.
Yeah, so a lot of the psychedelics right now is being applied in mental health space, which is outside of the area that we're in. So I will say we have not seen a large number of psychedelics for neurological disorders at this time. A lot of that's coming into mental health, and they are seeing a lot of that. I don't know in terms of what's been funded. I'm just not as plugged in. I do know that the NIH hosted a Trans Institute workshop, last year, 2 years ago now, on psychedelics and neuroscience. I think definitely that's, as the science has proves out, there gets more excitement about it. But NIH is a very, very science-led institute, so I think it just requires there to be a lot of really strong scientific backing to an approach, and before you're going to see lots of funding in that space. And I think hopefully we'll see that as that field grows. But if you're interested in that space, I would probably advise you to talk with the mental health small business program, because they can speak more about how that falls into their interest base, or how they're funding that space right now.
At least for the BPN program, for example, all I can say, the field it's not well defined yet. In a sense, just talking people in working on psychedelics, I think people are trying to dissociate the beneficial effects from the side effects, and I think as this come in the future clear, I think there will be more interest. So I would say, like Emily said, NIMH is the leading institute for that, communicating with them and their vision, if you want, in terms of psychedelics will be very helpful.
I heard a lot of talk. You guys talk a lot about IP strengths, and also AI and deep learning and all that. But in the deep learning space, we may not want to pursue patent as our IP protection.
Yeah.
If that's the case, how what is it gonna be considered? And if yes, what criteria do you look at that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And yes, so this is why I kind of mentioned that as an example in a phase one of making sure you're addressing how you are going to protect. I mean, a lot of times it's things like, well, we're going to have a data mode, or we have maybe we have unique patents on some of the hardware we're using to collect data, or, but it definitely is up to you to think about how you are going to keep yourself, as a leader in the market against potential fast followers. What is your secret sauce? How are you going to protect it? I don't think there's the expectation in that space that you maybe will have patents, because it's a difficult space. But I think you should be able to communicate how you are going to be successful. And obviously, many companies are successful with a variety of approaches to that. But making sure that you are clear and maybe working with the resources you have here to develop a strategy as to how you are going to protect your approach in technology is important to communicate then in your application, because it becomes if it's not addressed, it becomes a question. Well, can't someone just jump in and do the same thing? So.
Yes, you have to look into your, again, going back to what I mentioned, competitive landscape. You have to understand, who are you competing? What is your secret sauce? How are you going to protect that? And even for the phase one, you should have something in, broader perspective. What is your commercialization potential? What are you going to do? You have to start thinking about this, even early on in phase one.
I have a question about the phase one and phase two. So one of my lab mates, once again, they went to another government agency, IARPA, which is the same thing. They have phase one, phase two, phase three.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, though, it was different in the sense that they had fixed dates for the deliverables, as in phase one is a competition, and then you get pushed through and so on. Is it the same with NIH?
No, we run it very differently. I was previously at DARPA supporting neurotechnology development there for about 4 years, and a lot of the ARPAs, IARPA, DARPA, and a lot of defense institutes, they do it very differently. So a lot of times SBIR funding, you have specific topics. And so, for instance, at DARPA and how ARPA-H will run, you have a program manager who has an interest in a specific space. In our cases, it was, brain interfaces, right? And so they would develop a topic for SBIR that would be published that year that may be related to help them build this program and this capability. So they have very focused topics. And sometimes they are executed. SBIRs don't have to be grants. They can be contracts. They can be cooperative agreements. And so you may see that, I know at DoD, they tend to use more of the contract mechanism where they will put in things like very strict milestones, the exception to that, I think, in the NINDS is we're just different. We're doing a lot more investigator-led, right? We're much more tell us what you're doing, and we'll review it and let you know, if we think it's a high caliber project we want to fund. We do less we need you to create this widget or this capability. But we do have the fast track mechanism that I mentioned is a combined phase 1 and 2. And in that case, you do need to have very clear quantitative go, no go milestones that gate that initial proof of concept funding to this bigger, again, roughly $3 million that we're going to give you. And the reason for that is you're not going to go through peer review at that stage. You're going to come back to me as your program officer and you're going to say, hey, I met this. And I'm going to go through with a fine tooth comb on my own and say, if I agree they're met, and I'm going to talk to experts and we're going to, basically sign off internally on making that $3 million award without you going back to review. So there's a benefit there in that it can be a faster path between phase 1 and phase 2. I will say the fast track can be a harder mechanism to go for if you're a very new company, because you have to be ready with now 5 years of a technical plan, or it could be 3 to 5 years of a technical plan. Plus you need a very compelling commercialization plan. That can be hard if you're a very early stage company, but that's something I would bring up with your program officer once you identify them as whether they think a fast track mechanism might make sense to you. Also I mentioned that through these other programs like Blueprint, there are SBIR tracks, there's small business tracks. Those are run as cooperative agreements with annual milestones. And so, and they're run, very, very close contact with the consultants and the program staff. You're on calls with these people every 2 weeks, right? So that's a very involved, more DoD-like, I would say, way to manage the projects than the traditional SBIR grants.
And one more question for you. So say we are considering forming a partnership or a company with somebody outside of UCSD, but majority of the shareholders in the company are still UCSD folks. Would you still be okay to help, or like would UCSD still be involved in it, or?
So there's a question, just because you're associated or affiliated with UCSD, there might be some challenge of doing?
No, I have, say I'm in a company, I have 2 or 3 stakeholders who are non-UCSD folks.
Yeah.
And the rest of them are predominantly UCSD. Would UCSD still be willing to help in that case, or
Yeah.
do all of them have to?
So it's kind of like program by program. Some programs are very myopic in terms of just you have to be like active UCSD faculty, students, staff. The UC Foundry program, which runs off of the funding from the U.S. Economic Development Agency for that venture catalyst program, it's actually open, and so our mandate is not only to help UCSD spinouts, but also to the community, especially in the underserved. So I saw the diversity supplement, so I love that. So the goal is to help the community as well in that case. So for at least for the biotech side in the UC Foundry and the venture catalyst program, we're definitely agnostic in terms of does it have to be a UC SD spinout. In fact, in our last cohort, we had 10 institutions represented: Stanford, Harvard, Imperial College of London. I know we've got Millis Bio in the back there. So a lot of institutions, and then some of them not even the alumni from that. So again, program by program, but I think the short answer for you is we certainly have programs that are helpful regardless of the UC affiliation. We want to be supportive of the ecosystem, but yeah, of course we have a little extra for those who do have that affiliation. In the back.
I've heard a lot about letters of support in the SBIR process. What types of letters are most helpful, and which ones are kind of go, no-go letters that you definitely need in the process?
Yeah, so what you definitely need, you need letters from anyone you're saying is going to be a partner that isn't from the country, so the company. So certainly any consultants you're saying you're going to bring in. If you're having a university partner, we want to see ideally an intent to form a consortium letter, meaning you've worked out and that the university is kind of giving you a thumbs up that, yeah, we'll do our part in this. You can go ahead and apply for the funding. Sometimes if you don't have an intent to form a consortium, you have letter of support from either the PI from the university side or their dean. But basically, the must-haves are verifying that you indeed, the people you say are going to be helping you are indeed helping you. You don't need it from the people in the company, but anyone who's coming in from outside. Really, really great big bold stars are having letters of support from potential future funders. So if you have, a relationship with an investor and maybe you're way too early for them, but they kind of are giving you that feeling like, yeah, we think what you're doing is really interesting. We'd like to see it go forward. We're tracking your progress. That kind of a letter can be hugely impactful because again, we don't want to fund a bridge to nowhere. We're trying to find a bridge that's going to have an end on the other side of private money. And so just showing that you have a relationship, you've gotten some interest, does not need to be a commitment to you in any way. It can really be helpful. Same thing with strategic, so bigger, other potential partners, other companies that might be licensed partners, that kind of thing. Those are really helpful. And then anyone who can sort of validate if you're going out there saying, yeah, clinicians really are going to want this. Okay, get letters from clinicians saying they really want it. If you're saying this is a huge need for this patient population, okay, get a letter from the advocacy group from that patient population that says, yeah, this is a priority for our patient population is to get something like this would be hugely enabling, right? So things that can sort of prove or provide validation from an expert that says, yes, this is needed, we want this is a need, this is novel, any of that can be hugely enabling in the application.
In terms of those letters from potential future funders, would you say that's 100% of companies that end up getting the award have that 10%?
No, again, it's sort of like we talked about preliminary data. These are all like sometimes good or need to have, but they're not sufficient. So, just having that letter isn't going to make up for deficiencies in team or approach. Or I will say one big thing, the science is a big deal at NIH, at NINDS. We look a lot at the rigor of the science you're proposing. And so none of those things will make up for the other necessarily. Kind of think of all those components and be strong in all of them. And I don't want to even imply that letters for support from an investor is a necessity. I think it's not even, I would say, the common or an average proposal at a phase 1 stage that has that. A lot of times you're just too early. You just formed your company, just incorporated. You're just trying to figure it out. So it's not an expectation. At the phase 2 stage, I think it's more common and it's, again, helpful, but it's not a requirement. But those are the things that help you. And without them, you're more likely to get reviewer comments on or program concerns that are like, well, we're not really convinced that someone really does want this. I know you're saying clinicians want this, but I don't know. Or sometimes the reviewer that's a clinician might say, well, I don't really see how this is going to work, right? So they have concerns. But if you have a letter from other clinicians, then they might get it more. So it helps you. It's not going to cinch the deal necessarily, but it really can help to improve scores in those areas related to commercial potential, significance, impact, those kind of things.
So, well, I said that as someone who has to write a lot of letters of support for our startups, one of the table stakes is if you're doing work, certainly you have to prove that you have access to wet lab space and equipment.
Yes.
For the duration of the project.
You're evaluated on the environment. So certainly if you're going to be saying you're doing wet lab work, make sure in that facility section, the equipment section, you're saying what you have as a capability, letters of support to say, yep, they've got a spot here, right? That's an actual entire component of scoring is the environment in which you're doing the work.
So we've got the Foundry program, UC Foundry, it's about 10 weeks, and we then have the accelerator follows on another 10 weeks, and then our residency programs, pretty much indefinite as long as you have funding. I think our largest team got up to about 85 until they raised their 100 million Series B. AI and biotech, of course.
Yeah, fantastic.
The other thing on the, I just lost my train of thought, but the other thing for just making sure you have, as far as the letter of support, I think you covered the talent and that they have the right expertise, and we talked about the space, right, is to also go out. And you said, do you have funding? I don't think that factors in. You said, it's more of the science.
Yeah, absolutely. And in phase 1, we certainly would not expect that you've raised any money. Even in a phase 2, it's not an expectation. I think there it's more common for us to see that there maybe is some seed funding, some foundation money funding, maybe a Series A. I'd say where you get one thing to keep in mind is this may not be the case here, but for companies that have raised like 100 million, they really have to make the claim that they need federal funding. So we look at that on the other side of the sword. If you're really well funded, we might wonder why you need federal funds. There are good reasons you would need federal funds, but no, it's not really an expectation. It can be great. It can be a great gold star to have if you've had someone externally validate your technology and say we've put money behind this, but it's not a need.
For the BPN, because for let's say I'm doing some in vivo work and I'm doing mouse models, so I think the NIH, you have to not only find a CRO that does the animal work, but they need OLA insurance, right? They need IO. So is there any, so if I go out and I go find out myself, and I get that letter of support, with the BPN, is that part of do you actually help with the grant piece of that, if that's something you need to substantiate?
So like I mentioned, so there is a portion of the funding is grants, in the form of grants to the principal investigators to do that specifically, the in vivo work and the in vitro work. So, but of course, when it comes to animal models, there is all this, the OLA, you have to satisfy that, whether you do it in the lab or outside your lab through a CRO, for example. Oh, that's big.
But a big thing about the BPM program is NIH is already contracted with a bunch of CROs and CDMOs. So if you need to have your manufacturing done or a study done, they can just send it over, right? The applicant, the awardee, doesn't have to worry about that piece at all because it's all done through you guys.
Yes, so the piece that they don't have to worry about is like medicine and chemistry, for example, or toxicology study down the road, or pharmacokinetic studies. That they don't have to worry about. But anything to do with pharmacology, it has to be through the PI, and whether through a collaborator or whether within their own lab.
More question?
So in the section of the grant, the significant section, each department, each institute defined differently, right? Like NSF, they define high risk, high reward, it's long-rated objective. So what is your institute define as?
Yeah, we don't ask you to define any particular type of approach. We do want you to highlight your innovation. Innovation is one of the review criteria, and that's certainly one that we pay on the program side, pay a lot of attention to. We really, really like to see novel approaches, novel targets, first leads for a candidate, potential best in class, potential first in class. So it's important to highlight the innovation, but we don't specifically, go for high risk reward or, low risk, high likelihood. We have a wide variety. I mean, I think when you looked at the products that have actually hit the market, right, a lot of them are the things that can go straight to the market shortly after funding, so like research tools, assays, sometimes clinical tools, like we do a lot of like surgical tools, surgical imaging, digital tools, that kind of stuff. Those have a really high likelihood of getting funded. And we've talked about how, like, if our program's goal was maximizing the number of things that were commercialized, we'd likely go for these much more low risk, but potentially lower impact. When we think of that versus like a curative gene therapy for a fatal disorder, right? So we really, it's a mix, and it can be a bit of a balance between the risk and the innovation. But I guess, it's a good thing to talk to your program officer, because there's sometimes where we might say, well, the risk that's here is not, does not balance with how novel, innovative, and impactful it could be, right? And that's something we probably want to talk to you about, that it may not be successful because it's high risk, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be high impact. So I think we can really dial both ways. Our portfolio represents a wide variety and levels of risk, impact, et cetera. But it's something we would talk to you more about. And we try to keep it real and be like, I don't know, you might want to have this de-risked first. You might need to step back. I know you want to go for animal studies, but maybe you need to step back and do this first, yeah.
Thank you.
So just to add a little bit to that, I think one of the things we talked about was substantiating, is this a big problem or not, right? And that's kind of in the de-risking space. And we've got a couple of programs that help do that. The Foundry does that. Over at the School of Engineering, I'll highlight the IGE program, the Institute for Global Entrepreneurship. They also have a I-Corps program where you go through kind of the phase one, and you can go through different phases of it and actually get funding to get out of the building and go find out who has the problem, how big that pain is, and is that pain big enough to be in $1 billion market, right? Or lifestyle business. And it's not about, finding out good or bad. It's about getting the interviews and that lead up to potentially being those letters of support that you can use to substantiate that what you're working on is very promising and it has high impact.
I want to follow up on that because the I-Corps program you mentioned is it's from NSF. NSF funds kind of institutions to do regional I-Corps programs, and they're open to anyone. You do not need to be a company to participate in that program. And I will tell you, when I read an application and it's from a team that's done I-Corps, you can tell the more there's been more thought to the business model, more thought to the significance and impact, more thought around the team. They have advisors, So really, I highly encourage people to do this. And I'm hoping, NIH wants this entrepreneurial boot camp to be similar, and it's not like an in-person thing at a regional center, which I think is a really nice aspect of the I-Corps programs. The fact that you guys have one available near here, I would definitely take advantage of. But that was the idea with the NIH boot camp, was also to, if I have an NIH funded way, to give teams some before they apply, before they go and say, we're going to spend $500K building this, that they've taken the time to talk to people about what they're planning to build, and how they're going to implement it, what their go-to-market is, and what their significance is, and have really proven that out and refined that so it's stronger.
I was really excited to see the NIH boot camp and that you guys are taking that lean startup mentality as well. One of our teams went to nationals, but their application was rejected, and their challenge was the IP was not owned by a university. So I was wondering, does the NIH?
I haven't heard that concern before. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I've never faced a concern where there was IP and the IP was secured, but the IP did not originate at the university. It just hasn't been a conversation I've had.
Because I think for the nationals, the funds are distributed to the PI at the university and then distributed to the team.
Okay,
So,
it's through NSF. It's the NSF I-Corps.
The NSF
okay,
I-Corps,
so maybe they have different
so
policies
NIH
or
is more open up.
I at least haven't encountered that particular challenge yet.
It's not like we're streaming and recording.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
With
Next
NIH
question.
I-Corps, is it you have to get the SBIR and do the I-Corps, can you do it before?
Yeah, so the NIH I-Core program is only open to phase 1 awardees, and it's really intended to help you build out your commercialization plan for readiness to that phase 2 application. You can do both. You can certainly be part of the NSF I-Core program, which is local and regional, and then you can participate in the NIH one later.
We did the NSF local and national as well.
Oh, great.
And we are going to plan to submit an SBIR. The problem is right now all the SBIRs are due in September.
They are, yeah, they're
Including the
standard dates.
NSF
Yeah.
just launched theirs.
Oh, okay, so NSF is due in
Because it was
September as
supposed
well.
to be in July, but because
Oh,
of what's going
I
on
see.
right now in the government side,
Yes,
things got
yeah,
pushed
the
back.
NSF budget.
So everybody's gonna be coming in September.
Yeah,
So it's gonna
yeah.
be, and also AppWorks too, same thing. So it's like, it's gonna be an interesting way of, you might even get a whole influx. So during that review process, say your application was good, but didn't get scored with X, Y, and Z because it's so competitive this
Yeah.
season. Those companies that scored semi-good, do you
Yeah.
encourage them to do the January 5th deadline?
Absolutely. It's competitive right now, and that 17% is like NIH wide, but that can vary wildly between institutes, just depending on how much money they happen to have available, how many applicants come in that round. There's so much variability. And so you can be in positions where, you've gotten a great score, and maybe that's great score would have been funded 2 years ago. And then this year, right now, it's just not there. We absolutely will help you with resubmission. We will talk through the comments that you got from your reviewers, and really try to help you strategize how to be successful in a resubmission. I also will note, please reach out to your program officer after you've gotten your score and your summary statement. A lot of times we lose first applicants. They go in, they create the application, they submit, they don't get funded, and they're like, screw this, I'll do something else, right? I'm not going to get funded. So please reach out. When you get your summary statement, in the top, you'll see this is your program officer and their contact info. Send an email, say, hey, I got my summary statement. I wanted to talk through reviewer comments. No problem, let's get something scheduled, and we'll do that. So definitely recommend doing that.
I just want to add quick things to what Emily mentions, like reach out to us, but just have a time. I know like sometimes it's hard, you're applying, for a grant, and it's like very hard, like if you see that you're not funded, and then right away, you contact us, and then you want to see, what's the next step. So maybe take a pause, think about it, digest it, and then call us, because sometimes what we see during the call is, the PI is just, very frustrated, didn't get funding, and it's just complaining that, I did all these great things and I didn't get funding. And it's great, we can listen, but we have a limited time, so we can't really give you advice because you're just
Right. We want to help you with this.
And we're trying to help you in that short amount of the time.
One thing I try to impress, and I can say it to y'all now, but it's really hard to hear if you got a review and you're like, this reviewer did not understand anything. What is happening? You guys are essentially getting, what it would cost, consulting dollars wise, to get this group of experts to pay attention and read through what you're doing and give really, comments on what they think of what you're doing. That would be a very costly endeavor. And it's, you're getting that for free. And I know sometimes what they're writing is not what you want to hear. And it may be that they didn't understand something. But to Sarah's point, the only way we can help you is from the framework of what is in your power as the PI, as the CEO. You're going to have to, a lot of times, with people that know much less than what this panel is, you're going to have to convince them that what you're doing makes sense, is important, there's a market, there's a need, right? And so it is absolutely sometimes the case that they didn't understand something, but what can you do as the writer, as the person getting this across, to better communicate that? And so we try to enter from that perspective, because that's the only way, that's all that's in your power, is for us to help you figure out how to convince this panel that what you're doing makes sense. And again, to Sarah's point, even though sometimes the comments maybe you're like that, man, it is valuable to hear it, because it might come up again. Even if you don't go after NIH funding, you give up on this path, you may hear that from an investor, you may hear that from a strategic, right? So I think it's a valuable experience, even if it doesn't lead to funding the first time.
If I can add to that, because on the investment side, when it's really tough to give a no, right? And it's more common than we like, right? I mean, most of the time we're investing, we look at 100 companies, we might invest in 1 or 2 that year, and so when there's feedback, it's provided it's communicated and hopefully received in a kind way that understands, like, we did look at this very sharply, we just couldn't find the conviction. The right response isn't the 7-paragraph tirade that basically ends with, I'm smart, you're dumb. And so would you agree with that on the?
Yeah, and I think
NIH
it's just, I mean,
side?
I very much understand the issues, because like this stinks, right? Like, there's issues with peer review. It's not a perfect system. You may not get an exact expert in exactly what you're doing. You may get someone who's, a clinician in that space who didn't quite understand a part of it. You don't know what you're going to get. It does vary. There's variability in review. You'll say, I went in last time, I scored a 30, and this time I go in and I made changes and I got a worse score, and what's happening. And it's not a perfect system, but when a lot of the energy around the call that we're having is about like the downsides of the system, we can't change the system. We're not going to be able to change the system. This is how you're going to have to go through the system to get funding. So let's talk about what you can do and how we can help you make changes to be successful in the system that exists. I think that's kind of the message we want to share.
Yeah, I think if I may add
Yes,
to
please.
PPN program, for example, what we have seen is improvement in the review panel. So the scientific review officers have a better idea who to pick as a reviewer, and therefore the comments you get are very on the topic, right? So when you come back again and you address them, you have a better chance. That's what we have seen all the time.
Little secret on also how to receive feedback. Investors usually invest in multiple rounds. So if it's not this round, and you come back the next time, right? You've hit your milestone. Now you're coming for new funding, and you've listened and incorporated that feedback. The ability to have a founder who's coachable is so impactful.
Coachability is huge. If we see that, and that absolutely is noted. If we see it, it's like, okay, even if they're like, that's what they're suggesting we do doesn't make sense. Okay, well, let's talk about how you can further justify what you're planning to do. It doesn't mean you're just going to take that feedback and suddenly, we're going to do whatever the reviewers tell us. But how are you receiving that? Was that a good point? What did you learn from that? Hopefully there's some good comments there that have helped you build a better proposal. Yeah, we thought about that. That was a good idea. We've added that in now. So I completely agree. Coachability is a huge part of succeeding in this environment in the startup world.
Next question.
I'm new to this, and I may have the same naive question. What's the difference between like a small business sprint versus a preclinical ROI?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the R1s really can vary. I will say, I don't lead the R1s, but sometimes we do have cases in SBIR where we say this might be better for an R1. And that's where maybe there's this comes up a lot, a question about the mechanism, right? If or scientific premise, right? If you keep getting, feedback that's like, well, we just don't buy that this target is really gonna do this. There's no scientific literature. We may say, okay, you might need to take a step back and propose a more basic science mechanism study to further understand the science that you'll then leverage as the scientific premise to go forward in the translational work. So that's an example of them. In SBIR, it needs to be really clear that any of those activities you're doing are leading towards commercialization. They're really research and development tied to commercialization. And anytime, sometimes it's great to have other studies or other things you might want to explore, but they may not be right for the SBIR mechanism. They may be right for more of the basic science mechanisms like an R01.
I have another question. If in the situation where we're trying to repurpose a medication, already existing drug for a new disease, would that be a good thing?
So yes, we do fund repurposed assets. That's definitely somewhere you want to talk about the IP that you have. And it's somewhere where I think we look extra hard is this something that has another side at the end of the bridge, right? Because even if you have, like, say, your methods of use IP around that may not be enough in the investment world. Some investors are often like, they'd rather see a new chemical entity, right? And so that's where it might be more important to show that you do have potential partners down the line who would want to carry it forward. And that's definitely something to talk about with your program officer. I know you see a lot of repurposed assets.
Yeah, we see some of them. And honestly, I think what we try to emphasize is how is it going to be used off-label. And this is something the PI and internally they have to discuss it and how do you want to move forward with their strategy, IP strategy. Yes.
more important is IP.
Yeah, and going back to your preclinical, in terms of the target, generally you want, if something new, you want to validate it, new target, you do microarray, and so many genes or receptors, ion channels comes up, but you have to validate them, right? Knockout strategy or ASO to see it's playing a role in whatever indication you want to pursue. So this is maybe why they sometimes send you back to preclinical stage.
I think we've got time for one more question. Gentleman in the back.
And this is a dumb question, so my apologies. But if you have, is there any preference on company structure? So it's very easy to form an LLC, obviously, but investors vastly prefer a Delaware C Corp. So let's say you form an LLC and you plan to switch to Delaware C Corp later.
Yep.
You look at that and say, oh, that's.
No, we do it all the time. We fund LLCs all the time, and then those LLCs say we got to become a C Corp, and there's there's a little bit of annoying paperwork you have to do. It takes some time. You have to transfer the grant basically to the new entity. We do it all the time. Not a problem at all. Yeah, and not a stupid question at all either. Very good question.
I'll add to that from the investor side. The easiest thing for you to do is do a Delaware C Corp. If you think you're going to get venture back, the LLCs are really easy to do. But if you are a founder and you want to stay in that seat for a long time, one of the things you have to do is make sure you have some of the ABCs taken care of. One of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to be in the middle of a fundraise, have investors really excited to write you that $1 million, $2 million seed check, right? And then you've got to go to your lawyers and do the conversion of an LLC to a Delaware C Corp. And then right when that process is going, and it takes time, it could take a couple months. Some tech news journal or stat news comes out and says you have a competitor in the same space that just raised 10 times the round you're raising. That's a really easy way to sink your round. And so, it's a smart way if you think you're going to be a VC-backed company to start with a Delaware C Corp, because as we all know from sales, right, once you have the investors sold, you don't want that time kills everything. You don't want that opportunity to slip because your competitor, someone went public in that same space. Also, just in terms of founders, it shows your savviness, right? Business savviness. The investors want to. The investors don't want to be the operators. They don't want to be the CEOs. So they want to bet on an executive team who knows what they're doing. And if you're going to be a venture-backed company, no VCs invest in anything outside of Delaware C Corp. So it's kind of just table stakes. So that's a really good way to show that, hey, even if you're a first-time CEO, you know better enough to do a VC-backed venture starting off as a Delaware C Corp. So.
Yeah, I do think there's a little bit of maybe green, they're more of the LLCs are much more green, companies. It does give the air of you kind of know what you're doing if you're coming in as a corp.
Yeah, and it's reversible. Before you go out and fundraise, you can clean that up. And the resource in town that's really great on that is local at the University of San Diego, the law school. They have an entrepreneur clinic, and they will do incorporations as well as conversions for free. Student ran, but overseen by the professors over there as well. So all active lawyers. All right. Well, with that, we'll end. Thank you again so much for our panelists, Sarah, Emily.
Thank you all for the great questions. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're amazing. I learned a lot.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow up with you.